Welcome to this week's recording of Armchair Conversations with myself, Monet. So this week we'll be talking about the shadow. What is the shadow? And yes, it's just a shape on the ground. What is it in psychological terms? And how does it affect us? We've heard a lot about it, especially lately in the news and the state of the world, and everybody's doing shadow work. What is it? So stay tuned. Take a look. Right, welcome to this Introduction to Shadow Work workshop. Sit back and take some notes if you like. We'll also provide a link at the end that will give you some information. Presentation should take about 15 minutes, 20 minutes maximum. And I'm open to any questions. If you have any questions, just drop the link at the bottom and I'll be happy to answer them. So, shadow work. The question is, what is shadow work? Why is it there? Why do we even care? Why does it matter? So, the shadow is the psychological term for everything that we cannot see in ourselves, that which we don't acknowledge. I really like this image of the shadow of the mask. You see, the shadow is always there. It's always connected to us, but we don't necessarily know what it looks like. As we move around, it also changes forms. So we don't always know it. It's really the dark side of our personality, that which sits in the primitive mind and brings up emotions like rage, shame, hate, greed, all those emotions that make us feel icky on the inside. It's everything that we deny about ourselves. That is which essentially become part of the shadow, the parts that we repress and that we do not want to claim as our own. So the question is, why don't we see it? It's simply because we don't accept it. This thing called the shadow is part of our unconscious. It cannot be eliminated, but it changes its shapes and sizes. It's the parts that we don't want to know about, the disowned or unexamined parts within us. All the emotions that we don't like, the so-called bad emotions. So what do? We repress these qualities. And if we repress them too much, that's when the real trouble starts. So where do they come from? Like everything, it comes from our childhood. Now, general perceptions seem to think that all of our behaviors as adults, the way we do things, that's all developed in the first sort of 12 to 14 years of our development. I'd like to take it a step further and almost say that from the stage of a fetus is really when we start to develop our personalities, our motivations. You see, a fetus is exposed to certain things. A fetus is exposed to more estrogen or more testosterone, which may turn the child out to be more feminine and more masculine. It's a proven fact that when an unborn child is exposed to music, especially classical music, that it has a certain effect afterwards. Now, a famous president in South Africa, Mr. Nelson Mandela, said that no child is born hating. Children are always born with love. And it's true, a child is born with kindness, love, and generosity. But they learn to hate, they learn anger, they learn greed and selfishness. These emotions that they learn all come from the environment that threatens their basic needs. See, society tells us being good is accepted, being bad is rejected. So they learn that hateful is bad, so it's rejected. It's rejected in the shadow. So this is why it's important to start getting to know our shadows. This thing called the shadow, this dark side of us, operates in us without us knowing. And we're all on this constant autopilot. The unconscious controls our bodies. We actually have no idea when we do things. So what happens is that we inevitably, when someone does something, say something that we don't agree with, don't like, despise, we don't necessarily always say it, but it comes out in our facial expressions or in our body language, these unconscious reactions. And we might even regret these afterwards. You see, we physically transmit this negative energy. See, not being aware of these things impacts our relationships. It hurts them. It impacts our leadership, influences our decisions. Everything we do, everybody that we get in touch with, our family, our friends, our peers, our bosses, our colleagues, our staff, everybody is impacted by the things that we hide. So what essentially happens is that we become a mirror. Things that we don't like in ourselves or that which we deny ourselves, we project it onto others without seeing it. So we see it in others. So as a simple example, if we get irritated by someone who's rude and we haven't owned that rudeness, then we get upset about it. But if we've owned that rudeness, it would be nothing off our backs. It wouldn't bother us as much. These false identities of being good that keeps us from connecting to these negative emotions. And that's why we project it. That's why we don't notice it. We're not aware of these projections. Carl Jung, who's a philosopher, was really the forefather of shadow work and started writing about shadow work. And he said that knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. So knowing the things that you don't like about yourself is the best method to deal with them in others. There's obviously lots of benefits, and these are only a few. Improve relationships because there's less conflict. We don't have these triggers anymore because we notice the moments. We breathe, pause before we react. We improve our relationships with our peers, with our bosses, with our kids, with the rest of our family. We find it easier to accept others. And essentially, we become more grounded. We increase our confidence and evoke authenticity. We become more us, in other words. It encourages personal development to become the true self, develop some form of self-knowledge. So we really start getting to know who we are. And it essentially eliminates the inflated and deflated self. Inflated self, I am so good, or look at me, I'm so rich, or look at me, look what I've achieved. Deflated self, I'm not good enough. I need affirmation of being good at. More importantly, it's all about balanced living. It enhances our physical and mental energy and moves us towards integration or wholeness, so to speak. We dissolve this internal resistance to change and we start having conversations with our inner critic. We start calming that inner critic down, that judge that says that you're not good enough, look how bad you are. We dissolve these internal tensions with ourselves. So a few tips for engaging the shadow. Cultivate self-awareness. Start looking at yourself, asking questions. What am I doing? How am I doing? How do others react? Be honest. Be completely honest with yourself. Be kind to yourself and reclaim those projections. And most importantly, journal. I cannot emphasize that enough. You know, if you wrote one word, one sentence, one paragraph, one page a day, that's more than enough. Sometimes you don't even need to do it every day. But by writing it down, you start acknowledging the things that are within you and you start coping with them better. What I like to do when I do shadow work with people or in my courses, I start with the emotions: anger, fear, disgust, sadness, and enjoyment. Those are the core emotions. We start looking at each state of the emotions. So, for example, anger has a state of rage. When did I feel rage? What did it feel like? Who caused it? What do I feel about it now? When did I cause rage? So some might say, why do I throw enjoyment in? Now, the thing with accepting each other is that we need to move away from a positive and a negative connotation. See it for what it is. See the emotion for what it is. So we don't look at positive and negative. We only see it for what it is. So like everything else has got to be balanced. So we put enjoyment in there. It's got to be happiness, joy, exuberance. The other tool that I love to use is the Enneagram. The Enneagram is sometimes referred to as a personality tool. Sometimes it's referred to as bringing our motivations, our core motivations up. For me, it lays the platform of shadow work. It's simply hitting the fast forward button and getting to a point to start from unwork. A simple description of the Enneagram, and the one that I like most, is one from an author named Christopher Yertz, and he wrote the Sacred Enneagram and the Enneagram of Belonging. Christopher said that's often misunderstood as simply a personality tool to describe quirks and traits of people's individuality. The Enneagram goes much further than mere caricatures. Contemporary Enneagram of personality illustrates the 9 ways we get lost, but also the 9 ways that we can come home to our true self. In other words, it exposes the 9 ways that we lie to ourselves about who we think we are, and 9 ways we can come clean about those illusions, and 9 ways we can find our way back to God, whatever you perceive God to be. So the Enneagram is really made up of 9 archetypes. There's what they call subtypes or instincts, wings, lines, all of those happy things. I'm not going to go into them too much. The Enneagram is a different section or different course, but there's a lot of learning available on the web. And I encourage you to go and discover who you are, go and discover what your motivations are. So what I start looking at, for example, is once we know what type it is, and for example, I'll use myself as a type 2, we each have specific difficulties. So the type 7 would feel lost, type 2 is feeling humiliated, type 9 is feeling unlovable. So each type has a cause of pain and remedy. Type 2 not being accepted, and the lost message that type 2 needs to hear is, you are wanted. Type 7 not being held, your needs will be met. Type 9 not feeling valued, your presence matter. We also look at the coping strategies, the vice, passion, and the fixation. Type 9 sloth, indolence, and the fixation is avoidance. Type 7 gluttony and ego planning. Type 2 pride and false abundance. But what this causes is, how do people see us? Again, it's a perception of they see us differently, but we don't notice that. So what do others see? When we look at the planning of the type 2, others see egocentric generosity. When we look at the gluttony from type 7, others see selfishness. When we see the laziness of the type 9, others see it as just going with the flow. So where do you start? And this is a question that's not always just start for me, but it's a question that I ask almost on a daily basis. When someone triggers me or presses my buttons, think of what is the characteristic. What is that characteristic that you despise, that triggers you? Articulate that characteristic. And then ask the question, can you acknowledge this yourself? Who sees you as behaving or having this characteristic? It's so important. This is something that you take through the rest of your life. Because by acknowledging that trait or that characteristic and finding it in yourself, it's going to stop triggering you. So where to next? Journal, journal, journal. I cannot emphasize that enough. Even if it's one word on your cell phone, one sentence, it simply is just a trigger for you to write something down that's meaningful. Notice your triggers, acknowledge them, discover your wounds, ask your inner child, ask that inner critic, what is it? What is it that you want from me? If you have access to the Enneagram, or you can do one of the Enneagram tests, then look at the levels of development. Go and look at the vices, the virtues. Go and have a look at the fixations. See how that ties in with your shadow. And most importantly, be honest. So thank you very much for spending the last few minutes with me. I hope you have found it insightful. And if you want more information, visit this.tutor.com/illuminating the shadow. And that is more information on the shadow. So it's this.tutor.com/illuminating the shadow. Until next time.